But anyway, that we get to January '89, and I remember getting to. We were still doing a show at the TBS studios on Techwood Drive, but I think they had switched it to where it was nighttime tapings now instead of Saturday mornings. And that's when I found out that Steamboat was going to be Eddie Gilbert's partner against Flair and Wyndham, because I can't remember what interaction Eddie had been having with Barry Windham or what, or how Eddie was in that, but he had a mystery partner. Do you even remember better than me?
Eddie was having issues with Flair and Wyndham, and it led to the mystery partner thing. For a while, it seemed like Eddie, and if there was ever a time where anything was going to happen, 1988 was probably his year. That's the year he runs over Lawler. That's the year he books Continental. There's a lot of sheet buzz coming into him being hired by Turner or hired by WCW. And this was kind of where it still seemed like he was going to get a push, and then quickly everything went to Rick Steamboat. Not that it shouldn't have.
Well, but here the thing is, there's both these things can be true. You just know, Uncle Huck, that Eddie was trying to maneuver himself into the booking position with the new owners, right? Because that's a thing that Eddie would have done. Eddie wanted to be the booker. And it wasn't far-fetched because Dusty, it was just gone. Jimmy Crockett had been the interim guy. Eddie, I'm sure was trying to muster some forces that would recommend him, with the newsletters or whatever the case, and politicking. And it didn't hurt that he's working with Ric Flair and Barry Windham. And this was before Flair had any issues with Eddie, as I recall. So there wasn't anything personal going on. But they hired George Scott. The first thing that George Scott's able to do is bring Ricky Steamboat in to be Eddie Gilbert's mystery partner. And as you said, they have that match in the studio, and Steamboat looks phenomenal. And he beats Flair, and everybody's fucking jumping up and down. And that's when Eddie kind of got lost. And after the George Scott debacle, as you'll recall, when they went to a committee, Eddie was on it. And that was only 3 months later. And
then Eddie left the committee because he booked something. Ric Flair booked something for him to lose in Memphis against Ron Simmons. Was that it? And Eddie refused?
Eddie didn't leave. No, Eddie didn't leave. Eddie was invited to leave the booking committee. But he was on the committee after George Scott, and we'll get back to Ricky Steamboat. But after George Scott, the committee became, besides Jim Hurd and Jim Barnett, and Jody Hamilton, who they made sit in there, and they were going to be, regardless of whatever, it had become Kevin Sullivan, Jim Ross, Eddie Gilbert, and help me, maybe not anybody else at that point. And that lasted about 3 months, but the sins of George Scott did worse damage to the ratings because they kept going down, even though the other guys tried to do something about it. So by June and into July, that's when it was the worst it had ever been thus far. It would get worse later. And that's when Flair demanded, "Make me the booker." As soon as that happened, he still had all the people on the committee working for him, with him, whatever the terminology was, but he was the head guy and made decisions.
And by the way, just to tack it onto this story, when Flair became head of the booking committee, that's right when Rick Steamboat left, right when him and Hurd had the problems.
Well, yes. And that's another thing. He's like, what the fuck? Which we'll get into in a second. And now we've lost Steamboat. And look at these numbers and look at these fucking bullshit. But anyway, the problem was then Flair got, as we've noticed, when Rick gets cranky with you, he'll stay that way for a while, or maybe not sometimes on Twitter, but he'll stay that way. He gets a negative impression of you. I think he didn't particularly read the newsletters or have any knowledge of any of Eddie's booking in Continental or in Memphis or he knew Tommy, Eddie's father was a wrestler and he wasn't being disrespectful, but it wasn't like he came from the Gagne wrestling dynasty to Rick, right? And he's looking at a bunch of people. Kevin Sullivan was the only person he wanted to keep on the committee as it existed because everybody else it was either counterproductive or he didn't particularly feel they had that much to offer. But Eddie, they have a show in Memphis, and since he's on the booking committee, Flair's not there, but Flair sends the finishes. And it was for Ron Simmons, who at that point was getting bigger, but it wasn't Doom or anything yet, right? Ron wasn't main event guy, but still is Ron fucking Simmons. It is for Ron to beat Eddie. And Eddie looked at that and like in Memphis and like as a personal insult, as like a shocking slap in the face. Flair didn't think, I'm sure, any goddamn thing about it whatsoever. Because as he said after the fact, it's not goddamn Memphis, it's fucking WCW. We're on TBS, for fuck's sake. But Eddie took it personally and he changed, I think, the finish to some kind of DQ. I don't know if he turned it around and beat Ron. He might have, whatever. No, maybe he DQ'd Ron since he was a heel anyway. Whatever the fuck. That's when Flair called me and said, hey, you want to be on the booking committee? Because I'm fixing to fucking have an open chair because I'm getting rid of one guy. That's the way Flair, I'm getting rid of this guy or I'm getting rid of the other guy. Once that you know who he's talking about, he'll never name him again. And yes, please. What I'll do, whatever, just tell me when you need me, Rick. I have nothing to do with Eddie, right? So then, goddamn, I know we're meandering here.
No, this is good. This is good.
Well, we'll make up time with a shortened fucking SmackDown review. So then, I'm sitting waiting, right, for a week or two or whatever it was. And then Flair calls me and says, okay, I've told him I'm replacing Eddie Gilbert. He's off the deal. Or I've told him you're coming, be at the meeting Tuesday, whatever the fuck, however he told me. And so then that's when I went to the first booking meeting was at the actual CNN Center, TBS or WCW offices. And the boardroom table with Hurd and that old fucking thing. But Eddie had told the story, and I'm not trying to speak ill of him, but it wasn't true, that, well, he didn't find out that he was off the committee until he walked in and saw Jim Cornette sitting in his chair. Well, for one thing, we didn't have assigned seating. When you got in there, you tried to sit as far away from where you knew Hurd was going to be as possible, right? Otherwise, it was up in the air. And secondly, he already knew because he didn't come to a meeting and open the door and I was there. That never happened. Flair told him about it beforehand, and there was ill will between them because of that. Because of it was again, polar opposites. Eddie felt that his name and his reputation in Memphis and Continental and the Gilbert family and his reputation with the smart fans and the newsletters for his innovative booking should garner more respect than probably it actually at that point maybe needed. He was very good with especially with getting like Heyman, with getting a lot out of a little. His best talent was still in the ring. He was a very excellent worker and he could talk. But whereas he thought it should probably have a little bit more respect than it did, Flair gave it absolutely fucking none, because to who is fucking Eddie Gilbert to Ric Flair? So he was on the other level of the fuck. Who the fuck is this guy? Kevin Sullivan, I know he's worked for Eddie Graham for 15 years. Who the fuck is this guy?
You bring up polar opposites to tie it back to Rick Steamboat and the experience in Japan. One of my favorite Eddie Gilbert stories is when working for Wing, one of the outlaw groups in the 90s, if we are going to call it that.
Yes.
Him and Doug, and Eddie really didn't work Japan. got on the mic, took off their monster masks, challenged or ran down Mickey Ibaragi, who ran the promotion, and then my favorite part, pledged their allegiance to Giant Baba.
I remember that. They never worked for ever, did they?
Never. And Baba, can you imagine when Baba heard that? Like, I'm not hiring these two.
You see, the allegiance to me? Who are they? Who are these people who are allies of mine? Oh.
What a move. There was a series of, we're not going to make this about Eddie Gilbert. There was just a series of bizarre incidents around Eddie Gilbert in front of fans for like 5 years. Just
God damn it. All right. Since here's the thing. I liked Eddie. Doug's a nut. Doug, I've told you about before, he got mad, cussed me on the internet because I wrote the foreword to Howard Brody's biography, right? I wrote, Howard's had an interesting life. Boy, read this book. And then Doug didn't fucking like what Howard wrote about Eddie, so he fucking cussed me. And on the fucking internet, you and your fucking book, you fucking redneck, you can't read a book, much less know what anybody else has written. But anyway, it was Christmas week of 1980, I believe, or was it 81? For the purposes of the story, it matters not, but my records can correct it if anybody wants me to tell them. Tommy and Eddie Gilbert, baby faces, father-son tag team. They're fixing to leave the territory. I think that may have been when they went to Tulsa. Worked for McGurk.
79 into 80, right?
Well, but then maybe it wasn't, because I think it was. I seem to remember Killer Carl Krupp was here. That may have put it at 1980.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the point is, the Louisville Gardens had put a big punch. It's Christmas week, right? They had put a big punch bowl back there with punch for Teeny and for all the boys and the referees, and they'd put some Christmas cake or cookies, whatever the fuck. It's 40 fucking years ago. I don't remember what the food was. I just remember the effect of the punch. Because apparently after Teeny had somebody somehow spiked it, or maybe they took one down in the locker room where Teeny didn't go. They had one, but some punch got spiked. And apparently, this is what I was told. I was a mere photographer, but I'm shooting Tommy and Eddie's match with the heels. And some guy at ringside, because Eddie was young and gangly in those days, and one of the guys at ringside was fucking hooting at him, right? And Tommy got vocal with the guy back. And then Eddie did too, kind of a little bit, and the fucking heels were trying to redirect it. And the point is, after the match, somehow Tommy ended up going out through, or Eddie ended up going out through the fucking middle of ringside after the fan. Tommy ended up going out there too. I don't know whether to pull him back, and the cops went out there and they're yelling and cussing. And Teeny was hot because she came out and said something to the effect of, the Gilberts have been into the spiked punch. So I'm just telling you what I'm observing. There's the baby faces suddenly have an argument where they go out in the middle of the goddamn crowd at ringside yelling at one of the fucking fans, and then they're asked to fucking, go back to the locker room. And later on, Teeny's like, they spiked the punch. The Gilberts had too much punch. What the fuck? The fuck? Anyway, where were we?